Nurses have read it. What were the most haunting things someone said on their deathbed? Right before my grandma died, her heart rate shot up to the 220s. As the monitor started sounding all sorts of alarms, she yelled out, "Am I supposed to stop breathing now?" I work in a nursing home and one stick out for me was, "My kids left me here to die. May that not happen to you, son. Don't leave me alone. I'm an doctor, old lady big heart attack, refused treatment so we made her comfortable giving her morphine and benzos for her shortness of breath. While she was in the process of dying, I was with her and the family providing comfort. Her daughter said to her, 'Just let go, mum,' to which old lady opened her eyes one last time, looked at her daughter and said, 'What do you think I've been trying to do?' She passed away a short time later. Edit. Thanks for the awards. Try to spread awareness of end-of-life care plans, particularly amongst the older folk. There's nothing worse than trying to resuscitate a 90-year-old when you know it's hopeless because the family didn't do any forward planning. I'm scared. Elderly gentleman. Worsening congestive heart failure, incapacitated, and his wife put him on hospice. He was comfort measures only. I was at the nurse's station and I could hear him starting to gasp for air. I walked into the room and he was struggling to breathe. I put my stethoscope up to his back, but I already knew what was happening. His lungs were full of fluid. I sat him up in bed and he stared at me, eyes wide open, head tilted slightly back, facial expression was full-blown panic. I'm scared. Immediately after he said the words, his oxygen mask started filling up with pink, red frothy foam, running down his face and dripping onto his gown. He was dead within minutes, and all I could do was watch him. I will never forget his face. My grandmother grasped the nurse's hand and said, "I think I'm going to die now." The nurse was telling her no, she was doing much better and would likely leave soon, but my grandmother was gone before she could finish her sentence. She knew. How will I explain this mess? Pointing to his butt. Second hand from a close nurse. Lad comes in after a car accident. His work van had flipped and rolled. The fella was wheeled in fully conscious, no pain, after EMS, or disorientation. However, he was completely twisted in half from the midsection down. There was no way he would survive, untwisting, but the blood vessels must have been cinched in such a way that he didn't bleed out. The doctors and nurses explained the situation to him and suggested his family come to say goodbye. He looked like he was lounging on the couch watching TV with a blanket over his lower half. Once the realization set in, he replied with, "How will I explain this mess? I sat hospice with my best friend. She had breast cancer, and held it off for 8 years. At the very end, I was holding her hand for the last thing she said. I don't want to die. She really didn't. Wish she was still here. I worked in a nursing home and a lot of the people who were dying saw their spouses who had passed before them. One lovely old lady said her husband was in the room, and when I told her it was okay to go with him, she said, "OMG no, I hate him. I'm scared of him," and started to cry. All I could do was hold her hand and tell her I would send him away. She passed very shortly after that with a smile on her face. I hope he wasn't there for her. I'm a nursing student in Canada, and on my palliative rotation I had a patient that was getting medically assisted dying the next day. He was an elderly cancer patient. He told me he was a self-ordained minister, nothing official but an at-home type preacher, and that I could confess to him anything I wanted. I humored him and whispered to him some of my biggest secrets. I figured who cares, he was going to die tomorrow anyway. He told me it was all right, and I could tell he appreciated that I confided in him. He also told me his email address and said that while he would not be sending emails in return, he would be receiving them. He was a cool guy. Had a patient screaming out, "They're coming to get me," and calling for help. He died shortly after. I'm only 18. That shit never leaves you. She had skin cancer all over from a childhood event of her cousin pushing her into boiling water and eventually couldn't even roll over without writhing in pain. It was the worst experience of my life. I shortly left inpatient nursing after that. Not a nurse, but when my great-uncle was on his deathbed he told the nurse, "Hey, can you do me a favor and go get my car keys, I'm ready to go." The nurse went and got the keys, and he died before she got back with them. A family friend had a very young niece that was dying from cancer. Her parents were there to comfort her in the final hours, and one of the last things she asked was, "How do I die?" My grandfather told me he killed my mom's first husband with a bat at his apartment, rolled him up in a carpet and dumped him in a dumpster. Since they all used to hang out in a big group in high school, I asked my dad what happened to Bob, and my dad told me after my mom left him, he just disappeared. Former CNA in the dementia unit of an assisted living facility. My dad is on his way to pick me up now. She said that every time I checked on her until she died about a week after it started. While she was still mobile, she would tidy her room and sit on the edge of her bed and just wait most of the day. My stepfather passed away last year. Towards the end he was very cranky and hadn't treated my mother very kindly. Before he lost consciousness he was stroking her face saying, "Beautiful, beautiful," that made me happy. My mom told me that my grandma's last words were, "Wanna hear a joke?" And then a long beep was the only noise that filled the room. Edit. Why did you give me the helpful reward? My brother couldn't really talk while he was dying, but the look in his eyes before his death rattle will haunt me forever. Whatever he saw, it awed him like a kid seeing Disneyland for the first time. I've never seen a person's eyes go so wide. My guess is he saw the whole damn universe at once. Wouldn't that be cool? Edit. I'm writing this through tears, but thank you all for what you've commented and the awards. I've really struggled to make sense of his death. He was 35, but this post has unlocked a lot of deeply buried feelings. Truly, thank you to all of you who took the time to read what I wrote and commented. Ever since I've posted it, I've been talking to my brother and it feels good to do again. I really hope all of us get to witness the beauty peacefully. Folded hands, light skin tone. I've written about this before, but I'm a palliative nurse and there is this trend I've noticed. Sometimes when people are in the process of dying they can become delirious and hallucinate. I've heard from at least 5 people that they are scared of the dog in the room and they want me to remove it. Like legit different people in completely different rooms over the span of 2 years telling me to take the dog out of the room because they don't like it staring at them. This isn't creepy but sweet. I used to plan fundraising events, and held a candlelight memorial walk around our hospice house campus every year. One year, there was a hospice patient in the house in her final hours on morning of the event. She told all of her family, "Don't worry, I'm leading the parade today." As she passed later that day, her family saw us setting up. When we told them what we were doing they all started to laugh and cry. They brought her photo out with them that night as they led the procession. Doc. Had a patient who had a heart attack at home while cooking dinner. Right before he had a full cardiac arrest in the while we were getting him hooked up to monitors and stuff, he goes, shush T, while of course panting for air and sweating like he was running a marathon. I asked what was wrong and he goes, "I forgot to turn off the oven before I kicked the bucket." He immediately tried to die. I had a lady tell me in her confused state that her husband disappeared after years of domestic violence. I didn't understand what she meant. I expressed my condolences and asked where she think he went. All she said was underground. I didn't ask any more questions after that. I never did see her again. Apparently she passed shortly after. Guy confessed to being a Nazi war criminal. Not dementia, he was with it. I don't think he'd ever told anyone. I'm nothing but a murderer. Died a day or so later. I had a non-verbal patient overnight that was in for something pretty routine. Around 6:30 a.m. at the end of my shift I walked by his room and smiled at him. He waved to me. 1 minute later he coded and wasn't able to be revived. Looked after a guy with end-stage heart failure. He kept having episodes where if he coughed or leaned forward anything to increase his intrathoracic pressure, he would pass out. He would come back after a few minutes and gradually go from purple back to pink. How long was I out for that time? He was fully mentally fine, sharp, witty and at peace with what was going to eventually happen to him. Him and me were joking that one of these episodes were going to kill him, as he sipped his tea and we talked rubbish. 5 minutes later it happened again and he didn't come back. He had a DNR order which was sensible. Very eerie to talk to somebody so vibrant and alert minutes before he died. Such a nice dude. I want to be in that mindset when I go too. Heard my patient talking to herself so I go in and check on her. She said she was talking to her deceased husband and said, "You don't see him. He's sitting in the chair." Sent a chill down my spine, and then she coded a few minutes later. Shit had me spooked as a new nurse. Edit. It didn't help that it was on night shift and I was standing near the chair when she said it. Had me so spooked since I was only a nurse for a few months. Not my deathbed because I'm still here, but I had a cardiac arrest while in hospital. Before it happened my mum was visiting and I remembering being terrified of going to sleep and begging her not to leave. I could just feel a presence in the room and my mum says I kept looking over to the corner of the hospital room I was in. Eventually I fell asleep and she went home. As she arrived home after the hour drive she got the call to say I'd had a cardiac arrest. My dad's dad tossed a sack of kittens into the water. Yeah, I know. Before he died he said there were kittens on his bed. I didn't mean to, we were sending this middle-aged guy home after his visit. As soon as we moved him off the bed, he went unresponsive and had no heartbeat. We did a couple rounds of CPR, and he began to come to. He blinked a couple times and the doctor running the code jokingly said, "Sir, you almost died on us." The man said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," in a sad way. His heart then stopped again and we couldn't get him back. I was caring for an elderly neighbor, grocery shopping, driving him to doctor appointments, and checking in on him. One day I went to check on him and he didn't answer after several knocks. I called the police for a well check and they found him on the floor, alive. When I went to visit him at the hospital after he'd been treated for congestive heart failure, he told me there were little men in the corner of his room. They were coming for him, so he tried to get away. Even long after he was placed in a nursing home he insisted the little men had been there for him. When my sister was on her deathbed, she would point and ask who the people were in her room when no one else was there. Then I'd see her having conversations with these invisible people. I finally asked her what she was talking about and with who. She said she was talking to our grandfather. He died 20 years prior. He told her he was there to help her cross over. She told him she wasn't ready to go. He said to her that it has to be her decision and when she's ready to take his hand he will guide her across. You know what's funny? Everyone says living is the hard part. No, dying is much harder than living. Cancer patient in their 40s who was incredibly active and athletic up until their diagnosis. Said this to me as a student in my hospice clinical. Stuck with me ever since. I had a patient tell me that all she ever was a farmer's wife. She had dreams of being a German interpreter. She met her American husband in Germany. She told me to never lose sight of my dreams, don't be like her. I guess it wasn't technically their known deathbed at the time. My schizophrenic COVID patient in the ICU kept looking at me, chubby, 2 months pregnant but you couldn't tell, and was saying, baby I can't wait to see your baby girl. No one at work knew and I hadn't said anything. She ended up getting tubed and died. My daughter is now 8 months. The very first patient I cared for during school was palliative. I had him for a week and my job was very minimal, keep him company and help him drink when he wanted it. I was in him room and he started saying, "There is a girl on my bed." I asked him who is the girl and he just said, "The girl sitting on the end of my bed." I didn't think much of it, just thought he was a bit confused. Went home and the next morning I happened to come in early and the nurse on said to me, "Oh, you came early. Sorry to tell you your client died yesterday after you left." It sent shivers down my body. It was like he saw a presence in his room right before he died. My teachers had told us sometimes patients would see spirits right before they died, but I didn't believe it. Young man couple of years younger than me asked me, "Will it hurt?" My patient grabbed my arm, looked me in the eyes and said, "Please don't let me die, I have a daughter." My mother is a nurse and she said generally they're too terrified to talk. Regrets. It's hard to hear someone referring what they hadn't done in life and wish to do but don't have the opportunity now. My great-uncle's last words before he passed were, "It is what it is." I know it's really common but I find myself saying it quite a lot nowadays. It is what it is. My great-aunt who lived to be 101 was straight vegetative for like a month or so before passing, the day after her 101st birthday. On the day of her birthday, she suddenly was conscious and awake as everybody had come to leave a birthday cake. She told stories and laughed. Then she went back to being comatose and died the next day. Woman loved her birthday lol. Pulmonary doc here. Had a long-time patient of mine with bad asthma, and one of the hospital nurses and a friend in the hospital for a bad exacerbation. She had the nurse taking care of her call me at home. On a Saturday I was off begging me to come in. So I do, of course. All she said, with tears going down her faces, "Is it okay if I change to hospice? Please tell me it's okay." That messed me up for quite a while. During compression a kid sat straight up and yelled for his mommy. We never got a pulse back after that. The child was carried up 7 flights of stairs by the cardiologist who sent him in and found the mother talking to registration on the ground floor. The cardiology saw the child and checked a pulse only to find it weak and thready. He thought running up the stairs to the PICU was faster than traversing the hospital to the Mother never made it to the room. I had to tell my grandmother that dialysis would only give her another week or so to live and it was her choice to try or not. She was in and out of consciousness at that point and was in a clear state for the moment. She asked, "Will I die?" I said, yes. She looked me in the eye and smiled just a little and said, sometimes you gotta do what you don't want to do. She closed her eyes, squeezed my hand and slept until she passed a day later. When things get hard, I always hear her say, sometimes you gotta do what you don't want to do. A couple odd and sad ones for me, but one of mine is an elderly lady who was pleasantly confused and a comforter care PT who was on the way, and I was giving her a bath one night and I asked how she was doing and she goes, I'm a DNR baby, I'm doing just fine. She passed 30 minutes later. I'm not a nurse, but the day my dad died from a brain tumor, he finally was able to remember who my mom was after 4 months of forgetting. I was 2 at the time and not remember him at all. My mom said on the day he died, he seemed just like him and called her by the nickname he gave her. Later that day he died. My family is religious and my mom believes God gave him my mom one last time together before he died. Makes me teary-eyed every time I think about it. I'm not a nurse, but I work in healthcare. Sometimes it's not the words, but the lack of words that haunts me and saddens me most. There was once an old man who was really bad off. There was not family around at the time and he was unresponsive but had his eyes and mouth gaped open. I watched as his breathing slowed and eventually stopped, and the monitor stopped getting vitals. I watched his eyes glaze over while his dry bloody mouth gaped open. It reminded my grandparents and how life is too short-lived. The worst part was seeing his family react to him. He should have died around them, not me. Before my grandma died, she was in bad shape. That woman had 3 open heart surgeries. She looked at me and told me, do you see the angels? They are so bright and happy, there is one right behind you. I felt this light, beautiful presence in the room. Was a very surreal experience. It was crazier to me, because she was at the point where it was difficult to have conversations with her, could barely hold a thought conversation. Not a nurse, but right before my dad passed away in 2014, he told my brother and I, 26 and 25 at the time, he felt as if his time was now. He had stage 4 esophageal cancer. Anyways, he said, 1. I love you, proud of you, sorry for his wrongdoings, was an addict, made some poor choices, but he was a good guy. 2. He said some dude owed him $750. My dad had no savings, so it was a big deal to him. We got it back. 3. To smoke all his weed. And good night. His last words to us. I'll forever miss that crazy dude. She looked at me and said, you really are a little pipsqueak. I was her favorite nurse too.